So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our listeners all over the world. I'm Barry Muller, your host of the RevAmp podcast. Today, I'm honored to have Ian Cook as our guest. Ian is the VP of People Analytics at Visier. And the reason Visier is a super cool company. We could talk about that, and we will talk about that later in the podcast. But I was actually found Ian online in one of the articles he wrote, What is Driving the Great Resignation, on Harvard Business Review. And I had to talk to a person about this for our podcast because I think the soft skills and people drive an organization. So I thought that was super important for our Revenue Leaders podcast. It's not just always about numbers. And if it is about numbers, it's the people that make those numbers. So this was super relevant I believe, for our listeners, and I'm really happy to have Ian. So welcome, Ian.
Thanks, Barry. I'm happy to be here. I would agree. If I was a revenue leader, I would be extremely intrigued by the Great Resignation and wondering, is this going to hurt me? Is this going to hit quota? Is this going to hit our ability to actually deliver to the business? I think it's an important question.
Absolutely. So, Ian, before we go into it, because we're going to go into it deep quickly, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself that I missed in the intro?
Yeah, for sure. So my background, started life in consulting, always fascinated by how people organize to get work done, to kind of perform at their best. And that led me into the use of people data to understand how do people perform, how do teams perform, how does a business perform, and using that insight to do it better, to understand where it's working, where it's not. And so the last 10 years, I've been part of Visier, building out the way that we help our clients solve that. We work globally at scale on that problem. We got some pretty awesome results from it. It's been a blast.
That's awesome. I love awesome results, and I love using data to do things that people haven't been using data with. So again, we'll have to touch base on that later in the podcast because it's super interesting, at least to me, and hopefully for our listeners. So let's even just start with the most simple question. What is driving the Great Resignation, Ian?
Yeah. So, first of all, let's deal with the Great Resignation. That was what the thing was first called. And in my mind, that's the perspective of an employer. What did we start to see? We saw people resigning, and resigning isn't leaving the workforce. It's resigning and going and working somewhere else. It's doing a different kind of work. And so in our data, where we track, we have about 9 million employee records. It's not survey based, it's actually sourced direct from the system that is used to keep records. We were looking at these trends going they look more like higher, not just than 2020, but then 2019, which was already a high year. So we were starting to see these elevated patterns. So we dug into it. It's what is going on here? So we came across it by understanding these patterns in the data. People were leaving to go and work elsewhere in much bigger volumes than before. There is an alternative view which led me to really frame this as a great reset, which is work as a relationship between an employer and an employee. So the employee's perspective is I'm not resigning, I'm resetting how I go to work, I'm resetting what work means for me, I'm resetting how I live my life. And I think that's the right kind of frame. This isn't a one or the other, it's actually about that interchange. The labor market is shifting, people's choices are shifting. There's a lot of things to unpack in here. So, what is driving the Great Resignation is this moment in time where a whole set of trends have crossed the tipping point. Some of those trends that are well known are certainly in the States, people staying in work for a lot longer. I've seen a chart from the Conference Board that showed this steady increase in people over 65 staying in work. That chart has reversed. So that takes a couple of million people out of your labor force. Then there's changes to the way people are working. Again, I've mostly got stats for the US. The other parts of North America and parts of Europe are similar, just not as extreme. But the number of individuals who set themselves up as sole proprietors, I think it's 2 or 3 times the average number. What they're doing is accessing gig work. Instead of being an employee, they're saying I can make as much money and have a better lifestyle through gig work. I've done gig work. When I started gig work, I had to knock on doors and say, hey, I'm Ian, trust me, I can do it. Nowadays, you put in your digital assets to a platform, people find you and you get work. So like there's lots of the pieces have changed in terms of who does what work when and how do you work. So I think what's driving the Great Resignation is the pandemic created the conditions for this tipping point, and lots of different ways in which people engage with work all came about. And that's meant there's not a lot of people and there's a lot of work and there's skills mismatches and a bunch of stuff to unpack there.
Okay, yeah, there is definitely a lot to unpack there. So much to unpack. Let's see where to start. So first, let's be, when did you start seeing these trends? Like what month in 2021, or was it even earlier than 2021?
It was even earlier. We started to see the trends starting around September, October of 2020, sort of as it became clear that we could maintain some level of economic activity through the pandemic. As the initial shocks passed, people started to hire back, people started to move. We're not 100% clear how many people were leaving the workforce in September. We know in some instances women were overly disadvantaged and therefore they were actually leaving the workforce to go and take care of people. But that difference is sustained. What we know through 2021 is that women were leaving the workforce or resigning at a higher rate, but they were resigning to go elsewhere, finding employers that were providing flexibility, finding employers where they could balance the demands on their personal lives and the demands of work.
Right.
I think one of the first things as well, Barry, is maybe I'll just break down kind of how we looked at it.
Perfect. I would love that.
The first thing you would expect is, well, and again, this was presented at us when we started to make the story, is like, well, of course, there's a higher resignation rate. There's a whole bunch of young people in their 20s. They change jobs every 3 years. They didn't change jobs last year. They're just doing catch up. So of course, there's a higher resignation rate. It's like, it's the percentage that we're going to leave didn't, so we get more the next year. That was in the data. Absolutely. We saw the age band, the 25 to 30, 1 to 2 years tenure, that did kick back up. There was catch up, but that wasn't all of it. We also looked at people with tenure in the 5 to 10 to 15 years. So they've been in their business a long time. Usually you're quite stable at work when you've been working for that long. Like I'm just crossing my 9-year anniversary with Visier. Like I'm really embedded in the culture. So in that population, and again, they were 35 plus, that population saw an actually bigger increase in their rates. And so that isn't necessarily delayed career mobility of the young folk, that is different career options. So things we've seen for experienced professionals are changing employer because they can go and work on something different, or people stepping out, as I say, to do gig work. And this is where it's an interesting to look at the data on the event sets, which is what we have, and then listen to the social media, which is like, I give up everything to go work on a farm in Wyoming kind of stories, because you see those, you go, well, everybody's going to farms in Wyoming. It's like, no, Wyoming probably couldn't cope with that, but a certain portion are going, and that portion is material. And that portion could have an effect on your business.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then obviously if they're leaving, then that supply and demand makes it, more intense.
More intense. And this was
for the employer.
Well, for the employer, but and I think there's a caution here from the employee side, because sometimes employees go, oh, it's an employee's world. Employers are desperate. I will be able to demand anything. And so they come in with a certain sense of entitlement privilege. I would caution against that. Like employers are still going to be looking for committed, serious employees. So I just caution a little against whilst you have power, don't abuse it. It never works on either side. But the initial wave, again, what's held this back is lots of people were saying, well, everybody's just waiting to come back to work. It'll be fine. All of these support finances that have kept people out of work will tail off and people will start to struggle and then they'll be back to work. But we're not seeing that. Like the long-term trend in labor participation is trending down. I read an article by The Economist just at the weekend that said labor economists are having trouble forecasting labor participation, which made me laugh because we've been saying people are making different choices about work. So the assumption that that the number of people working goes back to what it was is flat out wrong. There may be less people, they may work in different ways, you may need to access them in different ways. We don't exactly know what those ways are, but we do know that they're different. And so just many more kind of these tight light indicators saying, don't expect just to go out and hire. You may not find the person, you may not find them where you want them, they may not have the skills you need. That notion of you're playing in a different labor pool, and the sooner you wake up to that, the better prepared you're going to be.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Before moving on, again, there's a lot to unpack just from that first thing. I wanted to also take another pause and talk about who are we talking about. It seems that we're talking about like software, like, you know, you're talking, I'm working in software, but
it's everybody. Like our data set is structured by industry. And so again, a lot of the story in the press is around retail. We have a retail warehousing transportation group. They have the highest rates, but again, historically, they're hourly paid. They have a high proportion of hourly paid people. They've historically had the highest rates, so they've seen a kick up. But we have finance sector clients, they've seen an uptick. We have tech sector clients, they've seen an uptick. The healthcare as well is also, it's a very tough space to be. Again, I always show appreciation for what that sector has done to keep us, so many of us, safe through the last 2 years. It's they have borne the brunt of a really tough space, so it's a very tough space. The only space we haven't seen in our data set would be manufacturing, has stayed fairly steady in terms of rates, but we don't have a massive manufacturing set, so that may be that we're dealing with more advanced manufacturers than other places. But it's not just technology, it's many different sectors are seeing this elevation, and that's where we think it's not a blip based on a certain sector being hot, because that's happened a lot with technology in the past. Certain coding skills become famous, everybody runs to that. We're seeing it across the board, so we think it is more of a reset in how employees and employers navigate doing work together.
No, it's really interesting. Let me ask a follow-up question, though. The past 2 months, the stock market has gone, specifically in tech, and I apologize for our manufacturing listeners, but specifically in tech, the stock have dipped across the board. I know because you can just look at your Robinhood or your Vanguard or etc. And will that change anything? Because once they start, once the public markets are lower, then the private markets will be lower, and then they'll be raising less money, and then there'll be less cash to allow people to maybe abuse the system, allow employees to abuse the system a little bit, and allow people to hire more people.
Yes. No, absolutely. So I mean, a lot of people have asked me the same question or a similar question, and the wage increase inflation spiral is the one thing that could change this whole dynamic, which tips us into a worse economic climate, in which case demand for people goes down, in which case the labor market rebalances. But it's not a supply side change, that's a demand side change driven by finite economics. I think there's always an interplay between the two, but demand could easily go down. If demand goes down, then supply rebalances. It still comes down to a lot of people have spent 2 years living and working differently. Many of the most experienced, many of the ones that you need in your business to help you make money are going to hold on to as much of that, this is how I like to work, as they can. And so it's not just, will I have enough people? The key for me is, will I have the people I need? And what do I need to do to make sure I have a relationship with them? It's less about, it's not just a straight transaction on capacity. And this is a thing I think, Barry, that I'd love to emphasize. A lot of times people are looked at as a finance element. There is a seat, it costs X. What we don't look at is like, well, if Jane is in the seat, we get 3 times the output, then when Joe was in the seat, we got half the output. any person who's doing a good job of running the math says, well, if one seat costs X and I can get 3X or 1X, well, I want 3X. And so I think people lose sight of the need for the right kind of talent in the right place. Not everywhere. You can't build your organization on A players. That doesn't work. But the right kind of talent in the right place is still going to be ridiculously competitive, and is still something that will differentiate your business from others, and is still something you need to be working on now, because you can't make it overnight. It takes years to grow that kind of capacity. So whilst I don't have a crystal ball. If I could forecast a recession, I would be doing something else. But there is the potential for the demand side for people to slow down, and that will cause a readjustment. But I think the enduring trend is people opting into work in different ways. And we'll see how it plays out. Time will tell.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I definitely don't want to take away by asking those demand questions from the important pieces that there's that shift, that reset. Is that what you called it, the reset?
I've seen other people cause it a reset, because I think it's a resetting of the expectations employees are bringing to their work relationship with their employer, and reciprocation on the side of the employer. One of the big pieces that we see is just around the digital mindset. When there's winners and losers and there's an abundance of jobs, people can go places where they're able to do good work, they're able to do meaningful work, they're able to do that in circumstances that match their needs, be it from a farm in Wyoming, be it from a condo in downtown Vancouver. And so more of those people have made those adjustments that will endure in the market. So they've reset the way they engage with work. If companies continue just doing things the way they've done, you'll only keep the people that it suited really closely. And if that aren't the people you need, then you're going to have a mismatch. So it's that quantity and quality have to be considered together. So I think a reset is a good way to understand the two sides of this dynamic.
Right. No, super interesting. So let's talk to the ways on how to access those ways to keep your employees, access the ways, because it seems like it's much more than just like recruiting like a specific way. This is retainment, which maybe employers took for granted at some point. Maybe they didn't. Maybe you can guide me on if there needs to be a shift on the employers from all this change.
And I think the way that we've been seeing the change is from what I'd call command and control to some level of co-creation. Like what I don't support is the press kind of going, like, the employee has got all the cards, the employee is in control, like employers have to do what employees demand or else they're going to lose. I think that's an oversimplified view. That's where we go to this notion of co-creation, where instead of an executive sitting in their office going like, thou shalt, it's more a case of like, here's the target, team, here's the way we want to go forward, here's why it's compelling, here's what's interesting about it, what do you think is the best way to chase it? We've done some research recently, we're going to put out in a bit, around hybrid versus non-hybrid, but it's employee choice versus worker mandated versus how do we do this? And I think it's a really good example of what we mean by co-creation. A lot of where we're seeing success, is the opportunity being delegated down to the business units to say, work out the right way of working to get as much done as you can. And if that's 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, well, put those 2 days together, because going home, office, home is really disruptive. Where you start the week in the office and you work the rest from home, you've kind of got blocks. Or, but let's not set policy at the center and have everybody try and follow and try and make one policy that works for everybody. Let's set policy as, do the work where you get maximum benefit. not half of my business, quarter of my business writes code. When we were all in the office, we had to mandate no meeting days because otherwise our code wasn't getting written. Now folks are working from home, we're getting better quality code because they work undisrupted. What we're missing is the innovation and the connection that comes from being in a team. So, as we go back with a development team to being hybrid, it will be intentional building of, camaraderie, sharing of knowledge, and hey, what do you think about it through that work, as well as like, what, go code at home because we love it and you love it. It makes us both more effective. And that's that conversation, as opposed to dreaming up that we can possibly make it right somehow from the top.
Mm-hmm. And that, I guess that's like interesting, because that's probably good for anything. Like OKRs also could be a co-creation. Really, a lot of business goals can be. You're just bringing that this has to happen if you want to progress further with your people.
I believe so. In again, there's always a caveat. It kind of depends on the sector you're in. But I have a founding story that pushed me into the people side of data. I work with a power generating industry, and I was told a story by one of the managers. I was a young man at the time. The person who drove the coal shifter around in the yard came to one manager one day and said, I have an idea. I think it'll save us money. The manager said, go away. What do you know? You're just the man who drives the truck. He went away, drove the truck. New manager comes in, person comes back, like, I got this idea for how I think we could do this better. He goes, oh, sure, let's try it. So they put it in place, they try it, they save the business $2 million. And it always stuck with me that the person doing the work knows it best. If they're committed, energized, and have a reason to be, they are likely the ones that know the answer to solving your problems. So like that whole methodology of running a business, anytime I've touched it, it's way better than like, person at the top knows everything, person down below just does. That was how we built organizations when we had machines in the kind of manufacturing era. Rarely do we just have machines. We often have machines and a whole bunch of intelligence. So accessing and enabling people to use their intelligence, most of us want to do it. Not everybody, but making your system to manage the 10% that don't, as opposed to making your system to elevate the 90% that do. I don't think that's the right way around.
Yeah. No, I love that story. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, so we focused on one thing, the co-creation. What are other ways? And obviously, every industry is different. Every company is different. You have to, every country is different. You have to cater to your company. But what are other ways to keep and retain employees?
Yeah, this goes back to kind of the core advice in the Harvard Business Review article. And again, it's something that we do with our clients. It's actually to focus on retention. In the pre-call, Barry, I've talked to a number of people. Often the people side of the business is managed in silos. So positions empty, quick, talent acquisition, try fill it. I talk to lots of talent acquisition leaders right now. They're almost as burnt out and crazy as the healthcare people because there are no people. They're burning the midnight oil in a difficult market. So actually trying to retain folks. And so that's about identifying who are those people. And it's not about, sometimes it may be money. I can't say it's not money, but money is it's a sufficient element. It's not always on, always a winner. And so it's engaging in the conversation of like, how's work going? Do you see yourself being here? Like, if not, why not? Like, what would it take? And sometimes very simple changes can actually make work meaningful. Be it, again, we have a bunch of experienced developers worked with the business for a while, putting them onto proof of concept projects or projects that actually shape things that we may want to put in the product, but we don't know yet because we've got to do a whole bunch of research cycles, using a piece of their time to do that, engaging in those conversations to say, like, what's the balance in work that keeps you interested and satisfied and aligns with what the business needs. And it's just keeping that, you can't have that conversation with everybody. So we use our AI algorithm determines who's at high risk based on a random forest model that allows you to say who should be prioritized for a conversation, how do we have that conversation skillfully, how do we then put things in place that helps that person stay in a win-win way. We're not manipulating, we're not making them stay against their wishes. That doesn't work with people. We're understanding their wishes so that our wishes and their wishes align and therefore they stay. Again, we've got countless examples from clients that use our technology that way. And I think a lot of people are missing out on the retention story when they look at the Great Resignation. They often see it as like quick, throw money at talent acquisition because that's how we're going to recover. In reality, you better shutting the door before the horse is bolted, rather than just trying to find more horses. So there's a big piece of this is being talked about less, is that it is possible to build good retention strategies, and they should just be always on. Like it's not something to do as a reaction just to difficult times. That's often too late. You actually have to have that as a kind of core habit in the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a similar story I've been telling recently as a marketer, just on subscription management. Like, don't just only focus on new business, focus on your subscription business, focus on the people already on.
Yeah, and don't focus on your subscription like 2 weeks before it's closed. Like, hey,
yeah.
I know I haven't talked to you for 11 and a half months, but you're going to renew, aren't you?
Right, exactly. So not to bring people back to the money, not to compare them to that, but it's a similar story in that sense.
It's a very similar story. Like you have a relationship when you have a subscription business, you have a relationship. You have a relationship with an employee. It's not a transaction. If you treat it as a transaction, as in like I show up 2 weeks before just to claim my cash, if you treat it as a transaction, you're going to end up in a less than optimal state. So I actually think it's a great parallel, Barry, because it is like, the difference between an employee and a robot is the robot has to be there, the employee doesn't. So, you have to have a relationship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. So let's talk about some other things. So I love this. It's this like working together, having the hard conversations, which sometimes aren't even hard. I think that's like so simple, but so powerful and so important. I think when COVID first started, people started talking about having one-on-ones, and now that's already all 2 years, which is crazy. But now that's already 2 years, people maybe are doing less one-on-ones and being more, less talking about how are you doing and more like, here's the work. We have to go back to that roots of having those one-on-one conversations. If that's what people were doing, they should go back to that. What are other ways companies can differentiate themselves between other companies versus specifically with retainment? What are ways that they can keep their employees happy?
Yeah, there's a big theme right now, which is it's under the massive umbrella of employee experience, but I like to chunk it down to, think about the tools that your employees get to use, and think about that relative to how they manage their personal lives. Like lots of organizations are being slow to adapt what I would call digital enablement technologies, things that make work go easily. And so, talking to some of our sales folks, they really appreciate what they've come to, because in many ways we've made it really, really easy for them to serve a prospect, get information, get insight, get the kinds of assets that help that person. In the past, they'd have had to, beg around, talk to a bunch of people, assemble that, stick it in an email, kind of fire it off. So when people have had an experience where it's hard for me to do the things I have to do regularly, I know they work, but there's not facilitated. It's not designed as a process. It's not, nobody's really understood how it takes me to do work. And they know that, ordering food on your phone, super quick, super easy. Ordering shoes on your phone, super quick, super easy. So my personal life, I have this really fluid experience of being able to do work, buy things. If I don't have that same kind of fluid experience within work, this employer doesn't really care about my work experience, doesn't really care about making me effective. And I talk to my buddies and they go, oh, wow. Yeah, no, it's not like that here. It's super cool. Then that starts to lure people away and say, yeah, there's more modern, there's more kind of up with the times organizations that are there, I'm going to win if I go work for one of them. And so I think that, understanding the employee journey, there's been lots of parallels drawn between the work that was done to understand the customer journey, sort of through the 2010s to the 2020s, is actually about understanding the employee journey, that all the different touch points. And that's not just an HR problem, that's a business concern or business kind of area of focus, to understand all the different touch points for the employee, putting in technology that just puts wind under their wings, like elevates their chance to win. Because most of us love winning.
Absolutely. I definitely do. So just to reiterate, one of the ways to help retain employees is to make sure to have the right technologies in place, so people are doing less manual work, or less work that doesn't make them like passionate about the job.
Yeah, and anything that's like, I think the classic is expenses. I've been working for about 30 years, so I know what it used to take me to enter an expense form, or it was on paper, it was all handwritten, you had to photocopy all the receipts. Now it's a little bit more digital, but just think about all of those transactional things that can detract from making work easy. And we're automating a lot of that. There's a lot of people building technologies that allow for that, and so it's looking at that. Like, sometimes it's even just asking employees, like, what one thing, if you did it faster, would make the most difference to your outputs, make the most difference to your productivity. And then you can't do it all at once, but chasing those kinds of benefits. It's like, oh, they listened, they took action, this is easier. Fantastic. I want to work with these people.
I love that. Just it's so simple when you say it. It just doesn't happen.
Well, most people think retention's about buying donuts, and I'm like, not really. Like, that has a very short time window.
Does pizza have a longer window? Or
I think that depends on your industry, but yeah, maybe.
It's funny. Okay, so cool. So definitely interesting. And I would even claim that and this is just, I'm thinking about this right now, so correct me if I misconstrued it, but it's almost like a reset by the employer, not just from COVID, but just from digitization of the world. So like I read recently that Amazon did $10 billion in B2B. So like, forget the B2C that like we buy from as individuals, but $10 billion worth in 1 year just bought from businesses on Amazon Business. So people are just used to the Amazon business, and now they're doing it for their employees. So I feel like that also has like shifted the way people view technology and things like that.
Absolutely, because one of the other shifts that is clear in the data is the underlying demographic of the majority working population. Again, I only have US stats, apologize. That the boomer generation that came into work when, if you got a job, you were grateful and you stayed and committed to the employer, that it's been on the decline for a while, because just purely on age. But the growing up digital population is now the majority of the leadership as well as the employee, people doing the work. So the expectations have reset. It was an underlying trend. It pivoted during the pandemic. It is now time to take action, because otherwise people's expectations are radically different. So yeah, that's absolutely important.
I'll ask one more question about this, and then I want to focus more on Visier because it's so interesting. Work-life balance. You touched a bit about that before, in the sense of hybrid, but work-life balance isn't just about remote or not remote. It's about maybe more flexible hours. Is that something that you see is being discussed, or people are focusing more on, especially with the wellness movement these days?
I think what's being focused on is less about 9 to 5. So I would say it's the removal of the things that broke flexibility versus anything else. Because I think a lot of people, having worked from home the way we have found them more productive, I found they're more able to balance work commitments and home life commitments and just like it. And it works for the employer and it works for the employee. So that there's no reason to sort of take it away. We need to add on some of the things that maybe build what's missing, that in-person collaboration, the innovation that comes from that. But we have lots of banking clients whose predominant model prior to the pandemic was like, oh, we can't possibly have all these people work at home. Like we haven't got the technology, we haven't got the oversight, we haven't got the whatever. It's been happening for 2 years. It's been great. It's worked for the people. It's worked for the business. Why would we undo that? So it's been a massive experiment. So I think there was a little bit of an assumption of it would unwind. I think what is actually being talked about more is like, well, this is working. What's missing, as opposed to let's go backwards. And again, I think that's a healthier conversation, is like knowing what we know now, how do we go forwards and complete the picture versus just assume we're all going back to cubicles 9 to 5.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's talk about Visier. And again, just for our listeners, Ian didn't ask me to talk about Visier. I just thought it was super cool technology, so I have to learn more. Your technology, and again, we only have 2 more minutes. This has been an amazing discussion and conversation, but your technology can determine when people are going to churn without like looking at their LinkedIn data. How does that work? That's so cool.
It is pretty cool, Barry. So let me explain real quick. Business intelligence, like you take data, you shape it in some kind of analytic model, you put a chart on top so you can answer business questions. Visier basically does all of that. So for our enterprise clients, we'll take data from multiple different people systems, payroll, core HR, survey data, whatever. We have a pre-built analytic model so we know what's in the data, and then we distribute that out. Classically, we'll be going out to 400 or 500 managers within the business. So it's not a people data just for HR, it's people data to empower the business. As part of that, we have a machine learning component, which just teaches itself off history, trains itself off what's good, what's bad based on history, and then generates a probability and ranks people based on that probability of their likelihood of exit. And we, again, we're not sort of, we stay well away from the creepy side of AI. It's like, this person's going to leave, quick, take their computer. It's like, it's not that stuff. It's, here is a rank list of people with a likelihood of leaving based on other patterns. You might want to go and have a conversation with them. It's all about trying to improve the relationship as opposed to control it. And again, we've got some great results from clients where specifically keeping salespeople, it has a direct impact on revenue ramp, quota attainment. There is a clear line between continuance of population and revenue in. So we've seen this substantive payback from being able to understand the employee from that level, tie it back to revenue, run your retention programs. We do a bunch of other stuff in talent acquisition, diversity planning, and cost planning. But the core of it is we build answers out of your people data. We do it very fast. We automate a bunch of it so that you can spend your time running your business, basically.
I love that. So you can actually spend time running your business. So then you can focus on your employees, and you can focus on being happy, things like that. Well, Ian, I'm really happy I came across your article on HBR. I'm really happy that HBR also released that article. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch and continue to learn from you. I'll definitely follow your company's content, because you mentioned that you guys are continuing to publish data like on hybrid and things like that. So our listeners should also do that. So thanks again for joining us.
No, it's been a great conversation, Barry. Thanks for having me on.